They laughed when the veteran walked in limping, but stopped when he called the judge by his real military code name. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And hey, if stories like this move you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful moments brought to life. He arrived unnoticed at first, just another man in worn boots and a faded jacket, his gait uneven and slow. Security barely looked up. He passed through the metal detector without a word, nodding politely to the bailiff as he moved toward the last bench in the courtroom. No one asked who he was. No one cared. To the public, he was invisible. To the prosecution, irrelevant. To the defense, unknown, until he sat down, facing the bench, with his back ramrod straight, hands folded, and eyes locked on the judge. Defendant was a young Marine corporal, 22, bronze-skinned, wide-eyed and nervous, accused of theft, falsifying documents, and violating military conduct. A dishonorable discharge hung over him like a guillotine. He had no family present. No superior officers came. Just his court-appointed lawyer, a nervous 20-something, who hadn't even passed the bar 3 months ago. Then the door creaked. Slowly, all eyes turned, casually at first, then confused. Some amused, an old man, gray beard, tattered navy ball cap, a cane worn smooth by time. He didn't speak, didn't look left or right, just limped toward the bench and sat in the last row. A quiet chuckle from one of the junior prosecutors. Guess. Grandpa's lost. A courtroom officer leaned over. Sir, are you lost? This is a military tribunal. He didn't answer. Instead, he took off his hat, placed it on his knee, and stared. The judge hadn't looked up yet. Not until the old man cleared his throat and said, calm and clear. Good to see you again. Ghost leader. The room froze. The judge paused, his pen hovering mid-air. Only 2 people in the world still called him that. He looked up, slowly. His expression didn't change, but the grip on his pen tightened, a brief flicker of recognition in his eyes. Then, nothing. Bailiff, he said. Who is that man? I'm not sure, Your Honor. The judge stood. Clear the room. Reset proceedings for 15 minutes. Gasps, murmurs, but no one moved. The judge snapped. Now. As the room emptied, the old man remained seated. The judge stepped down from the bench, walked to him, and sat beside him, without a word. 2 men, 2 ghosts from the same war, and the courtroom door clicked shut behind them. What they said next would change everything, not just for the young corporal, but for the entire tribunal. Because when the judge re-emerged, he wasn't the same man who entered that room. The bailiff stood outside the closed doors, ears burning with curiosity. Inside, the tension was suffocating. Judge McAllister, decorated veteran, now federal court judge, sat across from the one man he'd sworn never to see again. Still, wearing the cap, McAllister muttered. The old man smiled faintly, still hiding behind the robe. Silence stretched between them. What are you doing here? The judge asked, his voice tighter than he meant. I came for the boy, the old man replied. He doesn't belong in that chair, the judge scoffed. He falsified deployment logs, used equipment to forge documents. Disgraceful. You and I both know he's a scapegoat, the old man said. You saw the file. Those orders weren't forged. They were altered after he submitted them. McAllister looked away. You've read the classified briefs? I still know where to look, the old man replied. McAllister leaned forward. He's not one of yours. Why risk this? The old man's fingers tapped the brim of his cap. Because someone once risked their career for me. The judge's jaw clenched. For a moment, he looked less like a man in control of a courtroom and more like a soldier reliving a war he thought was over. He's a corporal, the judge said. The court sees rank, not intent. The old man reached into his coat, pulled out a folded document, and slid it across the bench. This says otherwise. McAllister hesitated, then opened it. Eyes scanned quickly. Then again, slower. "This is a Medal of Valor recommendation," the judge whispered. "Filed last year?" "Never processed," the old man nodded. "Suppressed. Like too many others." The judge's fingers trembled slightly. "And you brought this here? To use against me?" "No," the old man replied. "To remind you of who we were before all of this." Silence again. Finally, the judge stood. "You'll testify?" "I will." McAllister nodded. "Then let's open the doors." The courtroom buzzed when the judge returned. His robe flowed behind him. "Like a flag at half-mast. All rise," the bailiff announced. McAllister sat, eyes focused. "Before we continue, the court recognizes a witness who has requested to speak on behalf of the defendant." Gasps rippled. The old man stepped forward, leaning on his cane, his posture slow, but his voice steady. "I am Commander Robert Nash, retired, Navy SEAL, 4th Battalion, service number 31429A. Murmurs grew louder. The defense attorney looked stunned. "I served this country for 34 years, Nash said. "And I've seen what real betrayal looks like, what real bravery looks like. And that boy," he pointed to the corporal, "risked his future to protect a mission that never should have existed." He paused. "And I have the records to prove it." He turned to the judge. "With your permission, I'd like to submit Exhibit Echo 5. The judge didn't blink. "Granted." Flashbulbs popped, pens scratched. The room was no longer dismissing an old man in a tattered coat. They were watching history speak, and the prosecution knew. The trial had just taken a turn they hadn't prepared for, because this wasn't just a defense. It was an awakening. As the courtroom settled again, Commander Nash stood steady, his cane barely touching the floor. It was as if decades of war-hardened discipline kept him upright. The defense attorney, a young woman named Rachel Kim, glanced at him with a look of both gratitude and awe. She hadn't known this witness was coming. No one had. The judge's approval had rewritten the rules of this trial. Rachel stepped forward. "Commander Nash, could you clarify what Exhibit Echo 5 contains?" Nash nodded and faced the room. "Exhibit Echo 5 is an internal mission report, black-inked, never declassified. The operation it references was known only by a few men. Myself, General Harlan, and the now-deceased Colonel Briggs." He took a breath. "The mission was called Phantom River." Even the air seemed to pause. "In 2021, a small intelligence unit uncovered a weapons laundering scheme inside a protected ally base. Our government ordered a shadow cleanup. No press, no trace. I objected, loudly. And when I refused to lead it, they found someone else." He turned slowly toward the defendant's table. That someone was Corporal Aiden Cruz. Aiden looked stunned. He hadn't expected to be named in open court. Nash continued. "He was young, brilliant with systems. He found out what was happening and tried to report it. When no one responded, he downloaded encrypted files and rerouted a single comms log to higher command." Rachel's voice was tight. "And the accusation? They claim he altered the records, that he falsified equipment logs to conceal the leak. But the logs he submitted." Nash pulled a USB from his pocket, matched the mission specs, word for word, down to the unit codes only senior officers would know. The prosecution stood up. "Objection. That evidence hasn't been verified." "Overruled," Judge McAllister snapped. "This court will hear him out." Nash approached the bench, handed over the drive, and returned to the stand. Rachel leaned in. "Commander, why come forward now?" Nash's eyes were tired, but sharp. "Because I've spent the last 10 years watching brave men take the fall. For cowards in suits." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "And because I watched that boy's father die in my arms." Gasps echoed. Aiden's mouth opened slightly. "You knew my father?" Nash nodded. He saved my life in Helmand. And when I heard they were throwing you under the bus, I couldn't stay silent. The judge inhaled deeply, tapping the desk, with a solemn rhythm. Commander Nash, he said quietly, you're risking a federal violation by presenting classified intel. Nash's lips curled slightly. So did our founders when they wrote the truth on parchment. Silence again. This time, not of tension, but of respect. The courtroom had stopped being a place of judgment. It had become a reckoning ground. And outside the courthouse, journalists were already gathering. Whispers about the testimony spread like sparks in dry grass. Inside, Aiden's defense was no longer theoretical, it was personal. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. What started as a procedural case had evolved into a full-scale exposure. Commander Nash's presence was like a torch in a cave, illuminating shadows long thought buried. Outside, reporters clustered at the courthouse steps. Inside, Judge McAllister recessed for 1 hour, stating the evidence would be reviewed with the Department of Defense before resuming testimony. No one left their seats, except Rachel Kim. She moved quickly, heels clicking, with urgency, as she made her way down the corridor, phone clutched tightly. Langston, she whispered when the call connected. Check the military archive for Phantom River and see if there's any internal memo linking Aiden Cruz to equipment access during that window. On the other end, her paralegal was already typing. On it. Rachel knew what was at stake. If they could link Aiden's keycard to the base at the time of the signal leak without falsification, it would blow the case wide open. Back inside, Aiden sat motionless, staring at the floor. He was no longer ashamed, just overwhelmed. Commander Nash had retreated to the back of the gallery, silent again, like a ghost in plain sight. Why didn't you ever tell me about my dad? Aiden asked. Nash looked over, his eyes tired but warm. Because if I did, you'd live in his shadow, and you deserve your own story. Aiden nodded slowly. He died in Helmand, saved me, took a sniper round in the shoulder, bled out before evac. I tried to hold it, but sometimes it just slips away. Aiden closed his eyes. I always thought he was just another casualty. I never knew he was that. Rachel returned, nearly breathless. I have it, she said. Keycard logs, time-stamped, clean. The access was legitimate and matches Nash's timeline. She turned to Aiden. They framed you after the fact. The system was altered not by you, but by someone who didn't want that mission public. Judge McAllister returned to the bench. The Department of Defense has confirmed Commander Nash's credentials. And although they have not officially declassified Operation Phantom River, this court recognizes the severity of the evidence. He leaned forward. Miss Kim, please proceed. Rachel stood, holding the keycard log. Your Honor, we now have cross-verified military logs and an eyewitness account of the defendant's role. Not only was Corporal Cruz operating within his authorized clearance, but the mission itself, though covert, was compromised from the top down. She turned toward the jury. And when he tried to do the right thing, they tried to bury him. Gasps, murmurs. But it was the judge's silence that spoke the loudest. He looked at Aiden for a long time. Son, do you have anything to say? Aiden stood. Just this, sir. I loved serving, but I didn't sign up to be used as a pawn. I didn't forge anything. I just wanted the truth to matter. The courtroom went still. Commander Nash smiled faintly. In the back of the gallery, a woman quietly wiped a tear. The judge nodded once. Court will resume tomorrow with final arguments. He rose. And I suggest the prosecution come prepared for a very different kind of trial. As he exited, his robe swayed, heavy with the weight of something more than law, legacy. By the time the sun rose over the courthouse the next morning, the front steps were lined with cameras. Aiden Cruz once dismissed as a disgraced corporal, was now at the center of a media storm. Headlines buzzed with terms like deep state, betrayal, military whistleblower, and the veteran they tried to erase. Inside the courthouse, Rachel Kim walked in early, coffee in one hand, the other scrolling through her tablet. She wasn't just preparing for final arguments. She was preparing to redefine the entire narrative. Across the aisle, the prosecution team looked haggard. Ada Loring, once confident and commanding, sat hunched over a stack of files. He had been warned. The Department of Defense had sent a terse message: discontinue personal attacks, acknowledge the operation, cooperate. He knew what that meant. The system had chosen its scapegoat, and it wasn't Aiden anymore. Your Honor, Loring began, after proceedings resumed, the state would like to amend its charges in light of newly verified evidence. Judge McAllister raised an eyebrow. You're abandoning the fraud charge? We are, Loring said. But we ask the court to consider whether Corporal Cruz violated internal chain of command protocols during a sensitive operation. Rachel stood immediately. Objection. This is a shifting accusation, not a legal claim. The prosecution is moving the goalposts. The judge nodded. Sustained. Ada Loring, I suggest you stick to the case at hand. Loring sat down without another word. Then Rachel turned to the jury. This case was never about fraud. It was about fear. Fear of the truth. A young man did his job. He logged his mission. And when the system saw what it exposed, they blamed the lowest man on the ladder. She paused. But what they didn't count on was that someone was watching. Someone who never stopped believing in the oath. She motioned toward Commander Nash, who stood quietly from his seat. If honor is still something this country values, then this man's word and this veteran's sacrifice deserve more than just respect. They deserve justice. The courtroom was utterly silent. Even Judge McAllister leaned back, clearly moved. But the most telling reaction came from the gallery, where a woman in her 60s, dressed in a modest navy dress, stood slowly. She held a folded flag to her chest. Her eyes locked on Aiden. It was his mother. She hadn't spoken to him in years. Now, without a word, she gave him a subtle nod, one that said, "You did right." Aiden's hands shook. He'd never needed a verdict to feel validated, but in that moment, it felt like redemption. The judge cleared his throat. Closing arguments will begin this afternoon. I advise all counsel to consider what this courtroom now represents. Not just law, but legacy. As everyone exited, Rachel turned to Aiden. You ready to close this out? He nodded. Win or lose, I'm not hiding anymore. Outside, a single protester held a sign that read, Our veterans deserve better. And for the first time in weeks, Aiden smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, someone was finally listening. The courtroom was packed, not just with reporters and spectators, but with meaning. The air felt heavier, like even the walls were listening now. Rachel Kim adjusted her jacket, glanced once at Aiden Cruz, and then stepped before the jury. Her voice was steady, not loud, not dramatic, but deliberate. The kind of tone that made people lean in instead of lean back. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, we often tell our soldiers to obey, to follow orders, to serve without question. But we forget to mention the most dangerous part of service, the silence we demand when something goes wrong. She let the words settle. In 2017, Corporal Aiden Cruz logged a malfunction in the Phantom Protocol, a system designed for precision drone coordination. His report didn't cause chaos. It saved lives. Yet instead of being thanked, he was discarded, marked as a liability, stripped of rank, labeled a fraud. She looked directly at the prosecution's table. But the only fraud here is the lie we told ourselves to make that punishment feel justified. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Rachel clicked her remote. The screen behind her flashed a classified memo, redacted, but damning. Then a second, signed by a high-ranking Pentagon official. Each confirmed the flaw in Phantom. Each verified Aiden's original report. And if that's not enough, she continued, ask yourselves why a decorated commander like Nash would risk his own retirement to speak on record, or why the Department of Defense sent a message to this courtroom without ever appearing in it. She stepped closer to the jury box. This isn't just about one man. It's about every person who wears the uniform and believes that integrity still matters. That loyalty isn't blind obedience. It's doing the right thing, even when it costs everything. When she finished, there was no applause, just silence, the kind that carried weight. Then it was ADA Loring's turn. He stood slowly, a shadow of the prosecutor he had been at the start of the trial. The state does not deny the existence of operational flaws, he said quietly. But Corporal Cruz bypassed chain of command, creating exposure that... Judge McAllister raised a hand. Mr. Loring, we've established that the official channels were intentionally obstructed. Do you have anything new to offer? Loring shook his head, defeated. No, Your Honor. Aiden closed his eyes. After everything, the state had no argument left. The jury was dismissed to deliberate. The room emptied gradually. Aiden remained seated, staring at the empty witness stand. Rachel joined him, her tone softer now. Whatever happens, she said, you changed something. He nodded. I just hope it's enough. Hours passed. When the jury returned, the courtroom buzzed again, every seat filled, reporters ready. Cameras blinking like warning lights, the foreman stood. In the case of Corporal Aiden Cruz, we find the defendant not guilty on all charges. The room exhaled. Aiden didn't move, didn't smile, just let the verdict settle into his chest like armor being put back on. Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. And in the gallery, his mother wept, not out of relief, but out of pride. Later that night, outside the courthouse, Aiden stood alone under the street lamp. Reporters swarmed, supporters clapped, but his eyes were on the flag flying over the courthouse. He saluted, not to the building, not to the system, but to the idea that justice might still exist, even for the forgotten. The courthouse emptied slowly, like a theater after a haunting play. The crowd had gotten what they came for, a verdict. But for Aiden Cruz, it wasn't over. Not really. Rachel walked beside him down the granite steps, her heels clicking softly, the sound swallowed by the echoing city. They said little. No words could sum up the years he'd spent bearing the weight of silence, the stain of false dishonor. At the bottom of the steps, two men in dark suits waited. DOD officials. One extended a letter, no words, just protocol. Aiden unfolded the envelope. Inside, a formal reinstatement offer. Not a promotion, not an apology, just reinstatement. His fingers lingered on the paper. You don't have to decide now, one of the men said, almost robotic. The system acknowledges the court's ruling. You're eligible to return. Aiden didn't look up. He folded the letter, tucked it into his chest pocket, and said, I'll let you know. Then he walked away. Rachel caught up with him at the parking lot. What will you do? He paused. Not sure yet, but I know what I won't do. She waited. I won't let them bury another voice like mine. 2 weeks passed. The headlines came and went. Some praised the verdict, others questioned it. But deep within the veteran community, something had shifted. Emails poured in, letters, messages from soldiers, airmen, Marines, names Aiden didn't recognize but whose stories mirrored his. One in particular stood out. It was from a retired sergeant named Elijah North. His letter was short. I blew the whistle on faulty recon software in 2009. Got discharged. No trial. No chance. Your fight gave the rest of us hope. Thank you. Aiden read it 3 times before picking up his phone. He called Rachel. Can we talk? They met at a quiet diner. No media, no noise. Just black coffee and determination. "I want to start something," Aiden said. "Something real. A foundation for vets who spoke up and got crushed." Rachel nodded. "A legal fund?" "More than that. A platform. Legal aid, mental health support, press outreach, whistleblower protection, but for soldiers. Call it the Honor Echo Initiative." Rachel leaned back, impressed. "You've already named it?" Aiden smirked. "Had a lot of time to think," she smiled, but then grew serious. "You'll make enemies. I already have. And you'll need backing, money, lawyers, connections." He pulled out a small, worn notebook from his coat pocket, filled with scribbled names and dates. "I've got stories, and now, thanks to you, I've got a voice." Within a month, the Honor Echo Initiative had its first press briefing. Rachel stood at the podium, introducing Aiden as its founder. His story had gone viral. Donations poured in. Volunteers stepped forward. And for the first time, those like Elijah North had somewhere to turn. But Aiden knew the real test would come quietly, when the next soldier faced the same crossroads he had. That night, back at his modest apartment, Aiden sat at his desk and reopened his case file. He took out the original mission report, the one that started it all. At the top, where his name had been redacted, he picked up a pen and wrote it back in. Corporal Aiden Cruz. No longer a ghost. No longer a secret. Just a man who refused to stay silent. It was raining on the morning Aiden Cruz stood before the memorial wall. The polished black granite reflected 1,000 names and the single silhouette of a man who once thought he'd never be counted among them. Not in honor, not in memory. Just forgotten. He didn't wear his old uniform. He didn't need it. In his hand he held a folded American flag, one he hadn't touched in years. The one that had been delivered to his mother after her younger brother, Aiden's uncle, had died in Desert Storm. It had sat in a cedar box, untouched, a reminder of duty, of silence, until today. Behind him, a small group had gathered, veterans, journalists, legal advisors, even a handful of fresh cadets who had read about Aiden's story online and traveled across state lines just to shake his hand. But Aiden didn't turn to face them yet. He was looking at a particular name, one he had uncovered during his investigation. Sergeant Kyle Trenton, the man who had been blamed for the operation's failure all those years ago. Trenton hadn't survived the fallout. Dishonored, discharged, and forgotten by the system. A casualty not of war, but of cover-up. Aiden touched the engraved name. "Your story's not buried anymore," he whispered. Rachel stepped beside him, holding an umbrella over them both. "Press is ready whenever you are," she said softly. Aiden nodded, but didn't move. Just a minute. He closed his eyes, thought of the night he'd been dragged out of his bunk, the tribunal, the years spent in shadows. Then, the courtroom, the gavel, the headlines. And now, this. A flag. A name. A legacy, reclaimed. He turned around, faced the small crowd, cleared his throat. "I'm not here to talk about me," he began. "I'm here to talk about silence, the kind that rots, that poisons honor, that strips away trust from the very people we send into harm's way." The veteran stood straighter. Aiden continued, voice steady. "This wall holds names of the fallen. Some died in combat. Others died when the system gave up on them. We owe them all a voice, and we start by making sure none of us ever stays quiet again." Applause. He didn't stay long after that. He placed the folded flag at the base of the wall, a quiet personal offering. Then he walked away, head high, steps firm. As the rain eased and the clouds broke, a shaft of sunlight caught the corner of the wall where the flag lay. And for a moment, it shimmered, like a final salute from the names, engraved in stone. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in honor, truth, and justice. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? Your support gives these untold voices the power to echo far beyond silence.